What's up, cool people? I'm Matt Conroy. Welcome back to our Bible study. Okay, so Numbers chapter 19. We just read about the priests and the Levites, kind of a general summary of their responsibilities and what portions they were supposed to receive from the offerings, as well as what they were to give from the offerings. So anyway, here we go. Numbers chapter 19. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "Here is another legal requirement commanded by the Lord. Tell the people of Israel to bring you a red heifer, a perfect animal that has no defects and has never been yoked to a plow. Give it to Eleazar the priest, and it will be taken outside the camp and slaughtered in his presence. Eleazar will take some of its blood on his finger and sprinkle it 7 times toward the front of the tabernacle. As Eleazar watches, the heifer must be burned, its hide, meat, blood, and dung. Eleazar the priest must then take a stick of cedar, a hyssop branch, and some scarlet yarn, and throw them into the fire where the heifer is burning." Okay. Footnote at tabernacle just says tent of meeting. As we've been through multiple times, just might be a better word for word translation of the original Hebrew. Footnote there could be juniper rather than cedar. Although they may be similar enough that that's not really a huge differentiation. So, red heifer, no defects. Slaughtered outside the camp. Sprinkle blood on the front of the tabernacle. Burn it all. And then add a stick of cedar, hyssop branch, scarlet yarn. Okay. But continuing on from that, we get to verse 7. Then the priest must wash his clothes and bathe himself in water. Afterward he may return to the camp, though he will remain ceremonially unclean until evening, because of killing the animal, I guess, and or the blood sprinkling. Anyway, the man who burns the animal must also wash his clothes and bathe himself in water, and he too will remain unclean until evening. Then someone who is ceremonially clean will gather up the ashes of the heifer and deposit them in a purified place outside the camp. They will be kept there for the community of Israel to use in the water for the purification ceremony. This ceremony is performed for the removal of sin. The man who gathers up the ashes of the heifer must also wash his clothes, and he will remain ceremonially unclean until evening. This is a permanent law for the people of Israel and any foreigners who live among them. Okay, so these ashes were supposed to be used in the purification ceremony. And that's the whole reason this is all happening. I guess maybe it's going to explain in a bit what the purification ceremony was all about. I mean, by the wording alone, it at least gives you a general sense of what it was for, but still doesn't explain instances of when that would be used. So let's go to verse 11. All those who touch a dead human body will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. They must purify themselves on the 3rd and 7th days with the water of purification. Then they will be purified. But if they do not do this on the 3rd and 7th days, they will continue to be unclean even after the 7th day. All those who touch a dead body and do not purify themselves in the proper way defile the Lord's tabernacle, and they will be cut off from the community of Israel. Since the water of purification was not sprinkled on them, their defilement continues. Okay, so that explains it. whenever someone became ceremonially unclean, this specifically mentions from touching a dead body. So it might have just been in that instance. I know there were other things that could make someone ceremonially unclean, so those may or may not have been included. But still, wash with the special purifying water on the 3rd and 7th days. That's what that was for, apparently. Okay. So then we move on to verse 14. This is the ritual law that applies when someone dies inside a tent. All those who enter that tent, and those who were inside when the death occurred, will be ceremonially unclean for 7 days. Any open container in the tent that was not covered with a lid is also defiled. And if someone in an open field touches the corpse of someone who was killed with a sword, or who died a natural death, or if someone touches a human bone or a grave, that person will be defiled for 7 days. So still all uncleanness related to dead people. But yeah, all those different cases would have made someone ceremonially unclean, thus, I assume, prompting the usage of this purification water. Verse 17. To remove the defilement, put some of the ashes from the burnt purification offering in a jar and pour fresh water over them. Then someone who is ceremonially clean must take a hyssop branch and dip it into the water. That person must sprinkle the water on the tent, on all the furnishings in the tent, and on the people who were in the tent. Also on the person who touched a human bone, or touched someone who was killed or who died naturally, or touched a grave. On the 3rd and 7th days, the person who is ceremonially clean must sprinkle the water on those who are defiled. Then on the 7th day, the people being cleansed must wash their clothes and bathe themselves, and that evening they will be cleansed of their defilement. So, yeah. Adding further detail and clarification to what I basically said before. All these instances of people becoming unclean by coming into contact with a dead body, this was how they were to be purified. So they took some of the ashes from the offering in a jar and poured fresh water over them. I guess the jar was open, because otherwise that wouldn't really make much sense. So yeah, the ashes combined with the water go into the jar. Then you take the hyssop branch, dip it into said water-ash mixture, sprinkle that on anything that became defiled by means of the dead body. At least that's, I think, what's going on here. Okay, then verse 20. But those who became defiled and do not purify themselves will be cut off from the community, for they have defiled the sanctuary of the Lord. Since the water of purification has not been sprinkled on them, they remain defiled. This is a permanent law for the people. Those who sprinkle the water of purification must afterward wash their clothes, and anyone who then touches the water used for purification will remain defiled until evening. Anything and anyone that a defiled person touches will be ceremonially unclean until evening. Okay, but that doesn't mean those people in this last sentence necessarily need to go through the whole 7-day thing like the other unclean people had to. When it mentions people not being purified and having to be cut off from the community, I assume it's, because their defilement then lingers by not being purified. So anything that they touch then also becomes unclean. And that's probably the method by which the sanctuary becomes defiled. That's what makes the most sense to me anyway. Because, person might have spent the 7 days and try to act like they're all purified and whatever, but they didn't actually do the whole thing of getting washed with the special water on the 3rd and 7th days. So then they're still considered unclean, and other people that they come into contact with through just, normal ways of living, those people would become unclean, but then might not know it, which would defile the sanctuary, and yeah. Again, that's what makes the most sense to me. I could be a bit off on that, but that's still, I think, kind of the general gist of why those people then need to be cut off from the community. Because, otherwise you would think, oh, they could just, spend a little longer isolated and then be able to go about their normal lives. No. But these kinds of things would probably explain why you had some folks that, were kind of living near the people, but still somewhat outcasts or isolated in some way from everybody else because they were considered unclean and they didn't go through the proper ceremony to become clean, or the proper ritual, I guess might be a better word. So now it's like they're just permanently unclean. So they can't really fully interact with the rest of the community like they would be able to otherwise. Anyway, okay, so I guess that wraps it up for chapter 19. I don't really have too many other thoughts on that. Okay, so there were previous things about, purification times for people that became unclean, but this was never really mentioned in amongst those previously. I find it kind of odd how certain things are, so split up and just, scattered throughout the first few books of the Bible in terms of the laws and whatnot. But, I don't know, I guess it is what it is, and I guess, they kind of become relevant at different time periods, which is why they might not all just come in one, themed clump of information. Anyway, as always, like and share if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to the channel and click the bell to get updates when I post new videos. Look down in the description to get info on other social media pages and all that good stuff. And leave comments down below there with any thoughts you have. So that's it for now. Hope you're all doing well. Hopefully I'll see you for the next video. But until then, stay cool, people.